Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duvall, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who this week is introducing not an ocean, but a lake.
Tim Longo. Well done. Well done.
Thank you.
Yeah, this will be a surprise to everybody because we actually didn't announce this. We're working on it in the background, and it is a little bit out of cycle after playing Alan Wake. But we have Sam Lake here as a special guest, and so I'm going to introduce him really quickly, and then we'll get going. Very, very special treat, and we thank him so much for being here. As far as I could see, searching the internets, Sam was hired in Remedy out of college to work on Death Rally, which, we definitely need to hear about that. But starting in 2001, Sam began his story and writing for games career, as he was famously provided his face for, as well as signature smile for the game Max Payne. Beyond Max Payne, he wrote for Alan Wake and every game since then, including all of the Alan Wake follow-ups, Quantum Break, Control, and now Alan Wake 2. He also started creative directing on the games at Remedy from Alan Wake and American Nightmare through to Alan Wake 2 today. He also has just started a new stage career in musicals, and so we'll need to hear about that as well. So, Sam, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you. Happy to be here talking with you. So thank you very much.
Yes, absolutely. So as we talked about in pre-show, our audience definitely loves to hear about, how devs have gotten into what they love doing. Hopefully you love doing. It seems like you love doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah, and, I guess I'm sure you don't talk about Death Rally that much, but from developers to developers, we love to hear about people's first games, and that was 1996, I believe. So, yeah, how did you get into the business, as they say, if you don't mind going into that some?
Yeah, many things contributed. Growing up, I loved playing computer games. Commodore 64 was my first gaming machine.
Nice.
And then I got into tabletop role-playing games, and loved doing that and game mastering for a group of players. Out of which one of my childhood friends was one of the founders of Remedy. So Petri Järvilehto was one of the founders of Remedy, and when Remedy was founded, I was at the Helsinki University studying the English language and literature, and I was writing. I really wanted to write, and I was thinking that I would start writing novels. I was writing especially around our games and the worlds in the games. And then with Death Rally, Remedy needed somebody to write the texts for the game. And I was probably the only person in the kind of like close circle of friends that Petri knew who was seriously wanting to write. So he came to me and asked if I would like to come and write the text that they needed, very specific. We have 3 lines, room for 3 lines of text and this many characters. And this is a black market shop where you can buy this and this stuff. And we need text for these. And I jumped immediately into this opportunity. And here I am almost 29 years later.
Yeah. Amazing. Writing shop text for in-game stores and things like that. That's amazing. Just because Brett and I are both tabletop pen and paper players, any tidbits about your tabletop gaming? I'm kind of interested in kind of games you jammed for, or if you still do, or anything like that.
Or early world building from Sam Lake.
Yeah.
Yeah. I definitely think that tabletop role-playing games and building adventures and all is a great school for paper design for video games as well.
Yeah.
And I think it's a lovely, lovely environment for somebody who wants to write stories, because there is a captive audience. Players really, really want to stay in the world and consume happily anything related to their characters and the adventures. So there is a very positive audience to start writing for. So that's another thing. We started playing D&D, kind of the boxed sets, the colored boxed sets, and moved to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, going through all the early editions. My first big campaign that ended up lasting for over 8 years was in the world of Greyhawk.
Nice.
So Temple of Elemental Evil and everything after that, and then creating a lot of my own content into the world as well. Yeah.
Oh my gosh,
That's awesome.
I'm smiling so bit wide right now. Yeah, because it's cool to hear, because we do talk about D&D. We played some classic games that were based on D&D for the podcast, but we talk about it quite a bit because we both play, and I totally agree. I think it's really well said how good of a teacher it really can be for what we do in our day jobs. Yeah, it's really magical. And I played Temple of Elemental Evil back then too, so it's really it's cool to hear on the other side of the planet, people doing the same thing at the same time. Yeah, it's neat. So okay, so your death rallies happened. You got your break. Yep. Can you talk a little bit about going from Death Rally to Max Payne, where it seems like, by all accounts, you were really helping shape what Max Payne was at the time. So going from writing text to writing story and character, and of course, obviously using your likeness and things. But what was that transition like once you were within Remedy?
Yeah, the early days of Remedy, I would like to say that almost everybody apart from me, certainly all the founding members, came from the Finnish demo scene. So building demos with graphics and music and code into the competitions, came out of that, and they just figured out that they want to make games. So early days, there were a lot of people circulating, and nobody was being paid in a form of monthly salary. Death Rally, people were compensating with royalties, like split percentage royalties for what the game was selling, and it was really this kind of a loose garage band type of a setup. A lot of people hanging around, creating concepts for their own dream games, building prototypes for those. I stayed around after Death Rally. There were a couple of role-playing game concepts that I was involved in. One including a playable character who was this kind of a hard-boiled private eye that comes to play in a different context soon after. And Death Rally was published by Apogee, which is the same people as 3D Realms. Right. So Duke Nukem and all of that, George Broussard and Scott Miller. And Scott flew to Finland to check out all the different game projects and protos after Death Rally. There was one that went by the name of Dark Justice, that was kind of this near future drug war kind of a setup. And he was interested in that. He was saying that 3D Realms would fund that until we find a publisher. And the ownership of the brand would be split 50-50. And then we were pouring people into the project, not really pouring like team of 20 or so, myself included. And I was really, really keen on, even though it would be an action game, I was saying that we can totally tell an ambitious story as part of an action game, even though back then that had not really been done. Like, certainly there were plenty of games with story, but action games not that much. And I was saying that we could do that, and I can start working on it. And I was also pitching that because back then, this is like second half of 90s, cutscenes were pretty clumsy with the graphics of that time, and I was saying that we could use comic book panels to tell the story and tell a lot more story. I'm a big fan of comic books as well, kind of growing up, and yeah, like everybody agreed, and that's those were the kind of early steps of Max Payne then.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, it's great to hear that your push for that early on, essentially after Death Rally, going into Max Payne for story and games was that early. Obviously, Max Payne did stand out in that regard, and the style and the tone for that game was extremely unique, separate from bullet time or any of the other features that were implemented. Everyone remembers that, I think, because of its style and its story. So it's great to hear that was an early push for you, because obviously it's going to be a theme for this conversation, because it's become Remedy's known for many things, but it's definitely become one of the things Remedy is very much known for is the integration of narrative into development, into the rest of development, into games. And so it's such a special. I think you've inspired so many of us and so many people into finding better ways to put story in games. So that's awesome. So moving, the game we played for the podcast was Alan Wake. Obviously a little bit inspired by the sequel coming out. We do sort of like a scary game every Halloween, and that was the one this year. So we're a little bit behind getting the interview going, which is fine. But so moving from, there was obviously Max Payne 2, and both games, it seems like, from our perspective, did well and were great success for Remedy, and put Remedy very much on the map, I'd say. We were both at LucasArts at the time, sort of playing these games and also, like I said, being inspired by them.
And I think the IP also sold. I remember that being a big deal at the time, right? That between Remedy and 3D Realms, that was sold off as well, which was also kind of like a whole different thing. It was unusual. I remember it because it was unusual for an IP to be developed in games that was sold off like just as a big, like, here, we're just selling the IP, which hadn't really happened, I don't think, before that point. I wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah.
Yep, that's true. Like the first game obviously was a huge success, and I think for us, for me at least, very much, it was hard to even understand how big of a success it was. Like it took me some years to realize how big of a hit it had been. But yeah, Rockstar was very keen on buying the IP, and we sold it, and part of the deal was that we'll create the sequel as part of the deal for them. And so we worked on Max Payne 2. It was nice from the creative perspective to know that after the sequel we'll be doing something else. And so I had the whole. Well, it was a short project, 18 months, which is, looking back, it's a wonder in itself. But being able to say goodbyes in a way through the work, not knowing that after that something else would be worked on, that was a very nice way of doing it.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. When you have that assurance, but also For any of us who've worked on multiple games in a franchise, it is nice to move on sometimes and,
Yeah.
and get a fresh
Yes.
start. And
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. At that point, it had been 7 years of Max Payne and nothing else, and
yeah.
it
Yeah,
it did feel like it's time to do something else.
It's almost like
yeah.
you look in the mirror, and you see Max Payne.
Yeah, I don't know. 7 years. I feels like it's more than 7 years for you, but yeah.
Well, now he's Alex Casey, but that's
Yes.
another story.
Yeah. It's just a quick story. One of our first interviews we did, actually, I don't know if you are familiar with him, but Janos Schlosser, who's a friend of mine, who was one of the originators of the Hitman series.
Right.
We played Hitman 2, and he's one of the co-founders of IO as well. And it was interesting because he had a similar story about the early success of Hitman and it blowing up, and kind of how much of a success it was. And I don't know, just your story about kind of like that realization was interesting. To hear echo of that. So that's a great segue though, as far as like moving off of Max Payne to onto something new, which is the game of the conversation here, Alan Wake. So we have, obviously we want to kind of ask you about the early origins of that game. We have some development-y kind of questions because we've heard about sort of some of the early structure of the game and how it changed over time. But obviously, most important, the game is about a writer.
Yep.
And so where did Alan Wake, if you can summarize, come from after Max Payne?
Yeah, it's like I mentioned the garage band metaphor like earlier, and here is another music and band metaphor that especially kind of looking back, I really feel that this is what happened. It was this classic case of a second album being really hard for a band that has suddenly been hugely successful with their first album.
Yeah.
And we were kind of like happy and energetic in many ways, kind of like, okay, now we know how games are made. We have a lot of experience, and out of the deal selling the Max Payne IP, we are secure. So now we can make a dream game.
The old dream game, dream game thing.
Yes, and it proved really difficult. Like I was concepting different concepts together with Petri. The two of us, and we kind of stayed in that mode, I think, like at least 1.5 years, if not 2 years, creating a concept, being excited about it, starting the design, me writing kind of like full treatments of the story and all, and then for one reason or the other starting to feel that no, this doesn't feel good, this isn't the right direction, and creating a new concept, and that felt like an endless nightmare in some ways. Like some months there, all kinds of, there was a fantasy game, there was a zombie apocalypse game, very different takes into it. But bit by bit, slowly, out of all of these, some elements stayed and carried over to the next concept. And then we were having more and more of these things like light versus darkness, things like Stephen King inspired small town setting. Bit by bit, we were kind of like gaining things that stayed. And out of those, then Alan Wake was born. So it was a long road to get to that, and to me, like talking about the writer as a character, like what felt at the time really important to me was this idea after Max Payne, especially that I wanted a main character, a flawed main character who is not an action hero by trade. Somebody who is an unlikely hero. and just is forced into that situation. And I actually think that it was Petri who suggested at some point that, well, how about the writer then? And then it clicked into place, and I was like, yes, this is gonna be awesome, and let's do this, and yeah, I like Alan Wake as like maybe because of all the hard work that led into even concepting it, and all the hard work that came after, because it was not clear like when we went into production what kind of a game it ended up being. But it always has been very close to my heart, and there is something pretty magical about writing a story that is very much wrapped around the creative process in itself. That it has a large thematical role, the creation process, and being able to draw from experience of making video games, writing stories, all of that, and using it as material on one level of the story and plot.
Yeah, we talked about it obviously on the series. We took, I think we had four episodes on this, Brett, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So we play kind of book club style with the audience, and we
very
play,
cool,
chunk by chunk, and so yeah. But we, the creative process, obviously, as developers ourselves, it came up a lot too, and it's a very meta game. I mean, all of Remedy's games, I think, tend to be in some way, but it was very interesting, especially knowing your background and being a writer focused, creator in a lot of ways. First, you're really right. Now that you're saying it, it's really interesting to hear it coming from you, that the concept of creation and the themes that were sort of integrated into it. I mean, it's very much a game about not always knowing what's real and what's not, and how things have been created, and are the words coming first, or are the characters coming first, and all this stuff.
Yeah, or even what fits in the story, right? What
exactly,
makes sense in the story. Yeah, I mean, because your world is literally fracturing. I mean, I think that's something I really, really appreciate about Remedy's games, is the way that they sort of innovate over time into really integrating the themes of their stories into the game itself.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, and of course.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and of course, kind of like the whole Remedy journey, I felt as a starting point for Alan Wake's character, like the fact that obviously we had done Max Payne, and that had been a huge success, and now we were moving into something else, and it turns out to be really hard. Max Payne's Alan Wake's character then has had a huge success writing hard-boiled detective character, and then he kills the character off because he wants to move into something else, and something more ambitious maybe, and something more of his own, and then he suddenly has kind of a writer's block, and he can't create anything, and kind of like falls into this nightmare. So pretty obvious metaphors there between, but having fun with that as well, and it just felt very true and honest in some ways, which to me always is important part of story on some level.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Right. What right, as they say. Yeah. My wife is a writer, a novelist as well, and we talk about that all the time, right? What and how do you, and it's so meta. It's so great to hear it from you.
and if in case you still have then Alan Wake 2 ahead of you, when it comes to meta, you haven't seen anything yet.
Oh, I can't wait. I've been slowly, like Brett said, playing every context I can get to lead up to it. So I'm really excited. I'm sorry I didn't get to play it before this interview, but yeah. I did have a question about influences for Alan Wake. You mentioned Stephen King already. There might be some other obvious ones, but we didn't want to make assumptions. Are there any ones that you'd call out for, other than the Stephen King, being a really good one?
Stephen King, and and to me, especially with King, I would name his writing guide and autobiography on writing.
Yeah.
Because because to me it really was kind of the image you get from the writer himself. And obviously there are a lot of writer characters in King's books as well. But that kind of when he was talking about his own life and his own struggles and writing, that to me was a big inspiration for Alan Wake's character. As one thing, obviously David Lynch, obviously Twin Peaks being a big influence for me. There are other writers. Paul Auster was one big influence. His books and he has these meta layers.
Yeah, for sure.
There as well. Bret Easton Ellis, like he likes to put himself as this flawed writer character into his fiction. That's one thing. One very influential book is Mark Z. Danielewski's The House of Leaves.
House of Leaves, love it.
Yeah,
you're speaking my language here, Sam. These are all stuff I love.
I really at the university I really fell in love with postmodern writing, and especially like in an academic environment where you are meant to analyze and kind of piece together a theory. It almost feels to me like postmodern writing is created for that purpose. It's a game between the writer and the reader, and from that perspective, the meta is very, very present always, and that to me has been this inspiration for writing as well.
Yeah, it makes it great for games. I mean, I hadn't considered on writing as a source.
Yeah, me neither.
But I mean, he's always a storyteller. So even when he's talking about his writing, he's still telling the story of his writing, right? And so, what a great touch point. I'm so glad you mentioned that. It never would have occurred to me to think of the sort of memoir / tradecraft book, because I haven't read it probably since it came out. But terrific book.
Perfect. It's a perfect influence. And another one that just on the side that my wife and I talk a lot about. She's a big Stephen King fan. She doesn't write horror but she's a big fan, and that book in particular, huge influence on her as a writer too. So yeah, that's awesome. It's so applicable. So I don't. If you want to get into it, I don't know if you do or not, but we've always heard that some of the early development of Alan Wake, from a world, I guess I'll say world structure perspective, was doing some different things. We heard open world. We heard different other things. Yeah, and it sounds like, I mean, trust us. We've all three of us have been a part of really hard projects that went through a lot of different changes and reboots or what have you. So can you talk a little bit about some of the early goals?
Yeah, for sure. Like it was a bit of a, as said, dream game, and kind of like there were multiple people coming together early on then, and it was kind of this candy store type of a situation where everybody is putting their dreams into a big pile, and that ends up being a mountain. Sometimes it's conflicting, and sometimes they don't even fit together. But like we set out to create a free roaming open world game with a strong narrative and story, and we were not a big team back then, and we still are in some ways, I think. Kind of a bit of an underdog, even though Remedy has grown a lot. But if you look at AAA space, like all the studios have grown massively. Right. So, but at that point, it also kind of felt that that's the direction everybody are moving into, and And so we set out to build that. And a lot of the world was built, and we had an engine and tools to create open world. But it was the gameplay really that we were struggling with and populating the world with content. And I remember from the writing perspective, trying to match what we were talking about. So there ended up being quite a few story versions of Alan Wake as we went along, trying to find, okay, maybe we can make it work this way. Okay, that would mean this kind of a story. And yeah, no, that's not that doesn't work, and we haven't figured this out. You know, ideas like day and night, dynamic day and night cycle, and you know, gather resources during daytime and then defend against the forces of darkness during nighttime, and kind of what I felt sorry along the way, that to match it with story, it started to slide a bit more into post-apocalyptic scenario where there are survivors and everybody is very aware of the, you know, forces of darkness threatening us. And I felt that we are losing something like the idyllic small town setting was kind of drifting away, and we went. It didn't feel like we were getting any closer to really nailing it down, and bit of despairing along the way, until we finally kind of decided that okay, now we just need to figure it out. Like we can't be spending any more time, and in a very kind of Finnish culture way, we gathered together all the leads and directors of the project, and we called it the sauna group. And sauna group, because of the idea that we'll just go into a room and we'll lock ourselves in and we'll go through all the different aspects of the game, and we just kind of take the heat and we'll figure it out together what this game really is. And we are not coming out before we do. That kind of a mental approach to it. Because we had been drifting and there had been all kinds of tests, and it was not bringing us closer. So then we set out to make some hard decisions, and the turning point, very early big decision, was that we are not doing a free roaming open world after all. That we will create a linear experience out of this, and then everything just clicked into place, and relatively fast we had the whole design and all the ideas across the game. Obviously, we had an engine that supported an open world, and we had built the world, so it kind of gave Alan Wake this very unique, real feel with the environments, that even if we ended up locking you into levels, essentially there were great vistas into every direction, and the real world and the map still is there and was there, and kind of like we were just taking you in a linear way through it.
Yeah, we really felt that playing it. I mean, we could feel the open world origins in the vistas, in sort of like feeling like there's a lot of land here. It feels like it while you're moving around, even if you know, as a player, especially as a developer, you're like, oh, I'm definitely in a funnel. The funnel is this wide. It's a couple hundred yards maybe at most. But you can see in all directions. There's a huge forest out there. You feel like you're, sort of in the Pacific Northwest or somewhere in the Rockies. Yeah. And that really comes out of that. It must have been hard to kill a lot of those darlings. I mean, it sounds like everybody had kind of thrown in their pieces. How, it's a lot of sunk cost fallacy to avoid there. It must have been a pretty hot sauna, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, but I felt that kind of the hardest parts of the project actually everybody was feeling it before we made these decisions. Just the despair and frustration of it taking a long time and us not figuring it out and finding the kind of the critical pieces of the game. And then once those decisions had been done, I felt a huge feeling of relief, and I think that was shared across the team. And from the story perspective, what it allowed me to do was to go back to very, very early versions of the story and bringing a lot of the elements that were lost along the way in our kind of like winding road, searching for it. The idyllic setting and lot of the kind of quirky humor as well. That there was suddenly room for it, and because we could kind of like decide the time of day, and there were daytime scenes and nighttime scenes, and yeah. So right. I think that overall, like, everybody welcomed the newly found focus at that point.
Yeah, it's you took the words out of my mouth on the relief part, because to Brett's point, those are really hard decisions sometimes coming into them, but having been in that position before, honestly, where there's just something not clicking and the team has to come together to make some hard call. As you were talking, the word relief was something that came to mind. They're obviously hard because there's a lot of people who put time and energy and, long nights or whatever into the work that's not going to be seen. But most of the time, the team ends up appreciating it, I think, right? Because of that relief. And it's like, okay, now we know we have a path. We know what we're doing. We know what we're not doing. So I just wanted to thank you for sharing that story on air, because it is a kind of a vulnerable story to share about game development.
Yeah, it's hard.
Those happen more than we realize.
Yes, it can be hard, and it's really, really complicated and complex creating a game. But even in that situation, you are starting to see that if we are not going to figure it out, we're going to fail, and there will be no game. Right. And being able to like find that focus and create a game that is like that people love and a game that you can be proud of, that's turning a very kind of like negative situation into a victory, and it does make it all worth it.
Yeah. That's good. Thank you for sharing again. So so you have the structure. It sounds like things kind of fell into place at that point, and I do, like Brett said, we definitely, I think a silver lining from that was that sense of, I guess I'll say cohesion with the world, because the vistas kind of made sense, and you had a sense of beginning, middle, and end, more of a beginning, middle, and end there. So that was definitely a great silver lining that came out of that. And
also, one of the things we pointed out is that nobody sets out to make a linear single player game that feels that big, right?
Yep, that's true.
You wouldn't normally do that, right? You normally just build the things you need,
exactly.
But because you built bigger and then fit your game into the bigger thing, it has a different feel as a result.
Yeah. So one thing we wanted to try to use Alan Wake as an example, and this, I think, leading from this previous story is a good way to get into this, maybe. And this is the case for all of your games and all of Remedy's games, from our assessment. But integrating narrative into video games, and this is shifting topics for sure, and it's a bit of a big topic. So I don't, we won't have a lot of time to go into too deep. But I wanted some of your philosophy about how you approach it, because obviously there's, players will assume, and listeners who are listening will assume there's some obvious concepts, like the concept of a script that's written, or the concept of the basic elements of writing a story. But when it comes to video games, as the three of us know, integrating story and narrative into video games is a very unique, different, and difficult thing to do because of the player's agency. And I think we wanted to try to get into a little bit sort of like, what's your approach with integrating narrative into video games, and then having done it so successfully for many games now, is there any kind of philosophy, approach, pillars, goals, mentality that you can share about, like, even just the process of it for you? I know that's a biggie, but
yeah. So we can now spend a day.
Yeah, I know.
Talking about.
Yeah.
No, we need to go into the sauna.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, like certain obvious things, I feel, creating an action game and a story into an action game. Obviously, the story needs to support the conflict and the action, and so that's one way to look at it, and one starting point for it. The other thing is, strong, interesting lead character, but even that's a bit of a delicate thing. Like what I often find from the team side, people have this ambition of creating an arc for the main character from the sense that, well, if there is a supernatural element, like with Alan Wake as an example, that if this was a film or if this was a book, we would spend a long time in the state of denying and questioning, and not kind of running away in a sense. But if the core gameplay is that you have a gun and you should be facing these forces, it kind of, to me, means that you need to be pretty clever into building the suggestion of this kind of psychological arc into it, because what's crucial is that the state of mind and the drive of the main character needs to be as close as possible to what the player wants to do, and whenever we drift further away between these two, the more the player starts to feel that the main character they are supposed to play is stupid, and so that's a delicate thing, like especially the early parts of the game, to manage that. To me, I love to bring different mediums into the mix. I feel that basically all the forms of art that have been proven, because games obviously being this new thing compared to whatever prose or film or music or anything. More and more, especially now with Alan Wake 2, I wanted to bring different works of art into the mix as this fragmented whole of the story. Written pages of Wake's books and live action material in televisions commenting on things, and custom made songs where the lyrics are an extension to the storytelling. All of these things, I think, which is essentially, to me, it's quite important to understand how are we telling the story, what are the tools we are using to tell the story, because that easily affects the story itself and how it's written and what can be written. So methods of storytelling, the main character's arc, the story that gives us action, as that is the core mechanic. Also, like what I have loved using, which is also kind of a bit radical in a way, I feel, because like in film, it's usually said that show don't tell, and narration, voiceover narration is frowned upon easily, even though there are obviously wonderful examples in films of it being used. But to me, from Max Payne on, that has been a key part of storytelling in video games. I feel it's a wonderful device to get inside the head of the main character, and it's also a wonderful way of when we need to guide the player, we have that as a very inexpensive tool to guide the player. Instead of having the characters suddenly start talking out loud to themselves how they need a particular key for a lock. So yeah, maybe, I mean, this list could go on, as said.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to pick up on there. I mean, the transmedia stuff in particular is something I've appreciated about the games. You know, is that you find all these different vectors for storytelling, including the pages and comic book pages, and going back to Max Payne, or the TV shows that are sort of external. Night Springs being the sort of Twilight Zone, and then Threshold Kids being something else. I don't know. It's kind of hard to say what Threshold Kids is.
Yes,
I don't know. Twisted Sesame Street, I guess. But it's something not a lot of people bite off. But that getting at the interiority of the character through the pages, and then of course, in Max Payne it was the comic book pages. That's a really good insight. I really appreciate that. Thanks for sharing that. That's one I hadn't considered at the time. It exposes us to the character in a different way that doesn't feel false.
Yeah, and once again, like hyping up Alan Wake 2 for you, a ton more live action in like, I feel, more closely integrated into the critical path of the experience.
Awesome.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and one thing, even in the bits, this might have been an American Nightmare. I forget where these showed up, but there were the times when he is like on a talk show. Was that an American Nightmare?
That was a Nightmare, yeah.
Yeah.
And in Alan Wake 2, I gather. So.
Yes,
it was a little bit in Alan Wake. I feel like there was.
There is one talk show visit that you see in the New York flashback.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
When you go back to,
and you're in that, as I recall.
I am, and I am in the talk show in Alan Wake 2 as well. It kind of, the idea, just like taking what we did in Alan Wake 1, regarding that and building it into a much bigger element in Alan Wake 2.
Yeah. And the reason I was bringing it up from a transmedia perspective is, like, I think that was definitely one of our topics. So I'm glad you got into it on your own there, bringing that one up. But any game most games that integrate transmedia elements in some fashion, I feel like Remedy's been the best at having them have a purpose that really furthers the story or furthers the game in some specific way, rather than just doing it for the sake of doing it. And the reason I bring the talk show up is because, he, in the game, he talks a lot about his career, a lot about his success, a lot about his writer's block and those sorts of things. And then setting, a talk show host in the middle of it kind of brings it into more of a reality where you're reminded that he's a celebrity. You're reminded, you see things like standees, right? Like the standees are another thing that is kind of a collectible and very grounded in what's happening. So it's a clever use of transmedia to make it feel, or like in Control, basically what are they called? Not the Threshold Kids, but with the doctor.
Casper Darling.
Darling sort of instructional videos, right? It feels very much like something you would have in a federal government organization. So
or in Lost, it also reminded me of the
Dharma
initiative of Lost.
Yeah. Good, that's a good reference. Yeah, I didn't think of that one. So I think I just wanted to call out that it's like, yes, it's fun to do those, but to your point on telling story in different methods, having them blend together well is really difficult to do, but also can expand and enhance the game story as well. But going back to a couple of the early kind of pillars that you mentioned, being a gameplay guy myself. I generally am starting with gameplay when I'm directing versus writing. And I was really happy to hear, just as a call out for you, really happy to hear two of the first things you said were, that building the story needs to reflect well, and I'm sure they need to reflect each other well, but reflect the gameplay well, because that's what the player is going to be doing. Then the other one is which I think Remedy has always done well, is keeping the player actions and agency and intent, is similar to what the character is doing as well. And those are both very hard to do well. And I'm happy that they're the first things coming out of your mouth as well, that it's something that you think about, because the stories are still great. The stories are still really fleshed out, and I don't think that one is hurting the other per se, so it still can be done. But so anyway, thank you.
It is a critical thing, and it like I would imagine that at Remedy we early on in a project we tend to lean maybe towards developing the story a bit more than in many other studios, but it's still always team effort and hand in hand iteration and dialogue between the game design and writing, and it goes back and forth, and we keep on iterating on both sides until we figure it out and feel they really need to be supporting each other.
Yeah, that's great. No, I love it. Yeah, and I think I don't know if Brett will agree with me on this, but I think Kojima's games often, they're not always, but I think often have a similar goal in mind, where it seems like the gameplay and the story narrative, even though he'll go some places, but it's nice. It's nice.
I agree with you on that for sure.
We're short on time, but one thing I think we have to talk about and get in here quickly is the meta. I guess I'll just call it the meta narrative,
cross game meta narrative
of Remedy's games, which is highly, highly unique, and is, I don't, you probably have heard people say this to you, or that people say it. It's kind of become a description of ways to do in games, at least. It's like, do the Remedy thing where games are connected in story, which I think, at least among developers I talk to, it's like, that's how we talk about it. It's like, oh yeah, Remedy, let's do the Remedy thing. It's like, well, that you don't just do that. That's not an easy thing to do. So can you talk about some of, I guess it maybe started with Alan Wake, though there's some references backwards to Max Payne. And of course, the IP thing is probably complicated, but what are the goals there? How did you come upon that? Because it's so rare.
I mean, it really started from Easter eggs. It's that simple. That
nice.
Like it, and this was clearly already like really early on a thing with computer games and video games, like hidden things and kind of nods and winks towards other stories or games or film or anything. But I quite early on I started feeling that there is something here that can be more than just a joke, essentially, or a homage nod towards something else. That there could be a story to be told, and to me, like the big thing was that it's not so much to me ever Max Payne, but it's more like just Remedy's journey, Remedy's history, like distilled as a metaphor into like Alan Wake's history and kind of the character backstory. That was kind of the idea to me there, and then I remember like Quantum Break when we couldn't get Alan Wake 2 started at that point, and we were creating a new IP for Microsoft. We made sure in the contract level that even though Quantum Break is owned by Microsoft Studios, we could put in Alan Wake related stuff, and still it would be ours. So we have this kind of a trailer of an Alan Wake show, and there are other nods there, and it was finally with Control, because now we were first time in the position where we own 2 IPs.
Right.
So we have Alan Wake, we have Control, and even some of the work on Control began by us again revisiting concepting Alan Wake 2, but then decided to create a new IP, which was Control. We kind of knew from day one, working on it, that we want to set this into the same world. But we were very careful not to say anything out loud. We wanted Control to be able to stand on its own feet. So we made it a surprise to be discovered that Federal Bureau of Control knows about the events of Alan Wake and have investigated the events of Alan Wake, and there is content like acknowledging this, and then we kind of were finally kind of up and running with our idea of Remedy Connected Universe, and playing around with that. And I can once again hype up Alan Wake 2. That is to me that's our first true big crossover game, in the sense that there is quite a lot of Federal Bureau of Control content in there. But I feel in a way that is important to me that it's still standalone enough that if somebody is jumping into Alan Wake 2 as the first Remedy game, you can still understand everything, like the critical path of it. Maybe some connection points are lost, but then you can go back into the earlier games after and discover them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was a huge fan of Control, and of course, House of Leaves, really apparent in that one.
Yes.
You also, you work with a lot of the same actors again and again.
Yep.
I know that Casper Darling is the same as the voice for Alan Wake. Is that right?
Yes.
It's the same actor.
Matthew Porretta. He's wonderful.
Yes, right. And then Courtney Hope appears both in Quantum Break and, of course, as in Control as the protagonist. Do you, when you're writing, do you sort of consider those folks as kind of part of your stable? Like, do you write with them in mind?
Yes. Yeah. I think it's wonderful. Like it's a delicate thing, building a relationship of trust with actors, I feel. And when you find somebody who really kind of like gets the character and kind of like are great to work with, and have a great work ethic and all, you want to hold on to them. That's how I see it. Sure. And I really love dreaming up a new character already with an actor in mind, and having gotten to know the actor, knowing that, okay, they will do this in a great way. I like with Matt and Darling. Darling was specifically written for Matt. So yeah, I have been fortunate to be able to work with many great actors across multiple games. Ilkka Villi obviously being the physical actor of Alan Wake, and right. He's very much on board in Alan Wake 2, and Matt as well. James McCaffrey was a wonderful actor. Big tragedy of him passing late last year, and a big loss. But I was working with him. We were working with him ever since the first Max Payne. So many years, and he was Thomas Zane, the diver in first Alan Wake, and Trench, the previous director in Control. And Sean Ashmore was Jack Joyce in Quantum Break, and he's now back as a new character in Alan Wake 2, the local sheriff, Tim Breaker. So yeah, I feel fortunate that we've been able to keep this relationship going.
Yeah, that's really great. Yeah, I mean, I only started playing Quantum Break when we were playing Alan Wake, because I was like, oh yeah, I forgot they had this one because of the TV show. I kind of cut me off from it, which is a real risk, I guess. But I went back to play it, and of course now you can just watch the episodes on YouTube or whatever. So it was fun to see some of your cast there and go, oh, I didn't realize that you used those people as well. So it's really terrific to see, and I'm not surprised to hear that you're right with them in mind, and I'm glad you have those relationships.
Yeah, and I think hearing the connected universe approach with Control, and making it a surprise, having, I assume, very intentionally having the Alan Wake DLC come out later once the game had released, and which obviously having it be much more of a directed. Yeah, it's great to hear even the tidbit about the contract with Microsoft, which is I'm sure going to be interesting to people to hear that, because those complications are very, very difficult to figure out. Legally sometimes. So that's amazing. But yeah, I applaud you all for being so thoughtful about how to go about that so it can land well and effectively. So yeah, and you set a good inspiration for the rest of us. So thank you for that. And I think we're out of time. So we appreciate you. We want to be respectful of your time. And thank you so much.
Thank you,
Sam, for being on. This has been just a delight to talk this deeply about games with you. So appreciate it.
Thank you. This was great. Yeah, I enjoyed it a lot.
Welcome back from the break. That was a great conversation. I feel like I'm part of the Alan Wake / Remedy extended universe now. So especially because I gave him a book recommendation afterwards. So
I know
if some of that stuff appears in the next Remedy game, I'll be thrilled. So
yeah. I wonder what Easter egg he threw into this podcast that
that connects us.
Yeah, that was good. It was just great for I obviously I love hearing about people's process and how they think about approaching creative content and stuff. So and he's such a unique, not to sound cheesy, but he's such a unique voice in our space, and Remedy's games are so special and unlike anything else, as we talked about on the series. So it was really. And as you know, I'm kind of deep in the middle of it right now too. So it's playing the games, and I know you are still playing Quantum Break. So it's nice to be talking to him while it's on my mind.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and he is so sounds so thoughtful about all of it. And I'm not given the games, I'm not at all surprised by that. But it's also just like nice to hear
confirmation.
To be in it, and it's like. Yeah, it's not just some grab bag that we just kind of fit together and it worked. It's really carefully thought through, and experimental at the same time, right? I mean, especially with this game, experimenting a lot with figuring out the gameplay, having that drift them far away from the narrative. I mean, I can't even imagine trying to tell that story in a day-night cycle, like.
You can tell why. Yeah, I mean, you can see why the difficulties were coming in. Yeah.
I mean, because you never know. You have to totally approach narrative very, very differently and much more procedurally, I think, if you're going to do it that way, right? Because you're giving so much away to the world, and also I think having worked on open world games, I think it has a tendency to, as a result, water down the story.
Right. That's what I was going to say. Yeah, it becomes a series of quests and missions, right, versus a specific arc a lot of times, or because the player is going to do them in various orders, and you still have control over the macro arc in some way, but it's a bunch of smaller stories rather than one large story.
Right. Right.
As a player, that's how I see it.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think Control has aspects of that, but it's all in the written material. I think the reports and all that. I mean, you're just getting a sense of the size of the world, I think, at that point. But the core story remains very focused, right? And the same with Quantum Break. It's like this action-oriented, story. And they've been meta from the beginning. It's some of his touch points for literature. I was like, oh, of course, like I hadn't thought about him in the moment. Paul Auster was in particular. I was just like, wow. I mean, that makes a lot of sense, especially for the New York sections of Alan Wake. And now I'm just like champing at the bit to get to Alan Wake 2. I'll finish Quantum Break, and then I'll probably finally get myself a PS5 because I like to, I'm a console guy. So I want to try to play it on my
barrier.
Yeah.
And I ran out of time, and I didn't want to put him on the spot either. But I didn't ask about the musical number, which I don't think you've seen yet, have you?
I did watch it. Yeah, I watched it isolated from the rest of the.
Yeah, I just watched it on its own too.
The VGA,
Video Game Awards.
Yeah, the Video Game Awards. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I didn't watch the awards either. I just watched that one clip. But the only reason I was going to bring it up is because even that has connective tissue to the RCU, as he called it. Because the band is on stage. The what are they called? The
old gods of
Asgard. Yeah,
I think they're Poets of the Fall, I think is the real band's name. But yeah,
right. Yeah, but then they sang that song, and the physical and the voice actors for Alan Wake were on stage, and
it's amazing.
And the narrator, and it's like all this, it's just amazing. Yeah. And then Sam comes on and is dancing in the number with all of the what are the enemies called in Alan Wake?
Shadows? Darkness? Forsaken? No, something.
No, it's
Taken?
The Taken, yeah. Then all the other the dancers are the Taken, just running around with them. It's just the weirdest, coolest thing. So
yeah, that's real creative dedication to go that far, right?
Yeah.
I mean that everything you present is moving forward. Your themes, your ideas, like even in this show, which, honestly, it elevates the show to have something that good in it.
For sure. It's unexpected and not something they usually do,
Yeah. And I mean, that's real commitment and drive and just, thoughtfulness, to just bring it around to that is that, hey, we have this opportunity, what can we do with this opportunity?
What would we do? Yeah. Versus, something.
Yeah. What is the Remedy version of this? Right. And that's, that's very, I have some thoughts about that I guess I won't share here, but it's like, there's definitely a difference, in that approach, to some others I've seen. So, I mean, the other people I thought of that we've also interviewed, in particular, you mentioned Giannis, Flosser from Hitman, but of course, Tim Schafer, similarly very thoughtful about how he approaches, his stories and how they go into the games, but also likes to work with some of the same people again and again and again. And then of course, I thought of Ken Levine as well with his, the sort of BioShock connected universe. Which a lot of indies, because BioShock, for one reason or another, that, tended to spawn a lot of independent developers. A lot of those games are in the BioShock, connected universe. They say, like Firewatch is part of the BioShock universe.
Do?
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's a whole thing.
I did not know that.
Yeah. Because of connections with
people who worked on BioShock, you mean?
People who worked on BioShock, but also just, there's little tendrils that
like Easter eggs.
The Easter eggs, and like there are a series of written books in Firewatch that are I think the author is he's the one from Gone Home. Like, I mean, so they have their own kind of thing.
I see.
That's all kind of connected.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, the fact that he, when we talked about that, when we asked him about it, that he brought up Easter eggs immediately is also a great. I mean, because they are essentially, but it's nice to see that he and they came to the conclusion of like, well, we're going to do Easter eggs. Why not have them have some additional kind of thoughtful purpose to them?
Right.
Because we all love to do Easter eggs, but it's usually kind of a throwaway thing.
Yeah, they're usually kind of jokey in jokes that the team has, or.
Well, I was thinking of Sam, Max's head. No, not to reference another Max, but Max's head someplace in all of the LucasArts games back in the day, right? As an Easter egg.
Right, yeah.
Max's face, the bunny.
Yeah.
Hilarious.
Yeah.
But was only just a LucasArts throwaway thing.
Right.
Mac had no purpose other.
Yeah. It wasn't. There was no Sam and Max extended universe that we were trying to explicate. With those heads being everywhere.
Although I guess with these rules, all LucasArts games were part of the Sam and Max connected universe.
Yeah,
because he was there.
He was there. Yeah. Not any of ours though. So.
Oh darn it! We missed that.
we blew it. We had our choice, our chance rather. Anyway, great conversation with Sam. We thank him so much for his time. This one was something to arrange. They were coming out with Alan Wake 2, while we were playing Alan Wake. So that would have not been a good time to get the interview. Because first of all you want to talk about then is the game that's out for sure. And now I'm just like, super excited to play that game, in the very near future, I imagine.
Yeah.
But
I'm technically ready, but I've hit a bump in the road from my commitments.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry. I can.
No, it's good. It's good. It's for a good cause. So.
Yeah, we have to figure out how to get that working for you because of your.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. I'm talking to people on Discord about it. Maybe I'll just start over and play the PC version, the new one that just came out. I'll see how it goes. Wow,
that's a lot.
Yeah, I know. It's maybe a mistake, but we'll see.
We'll see.
Maybe I don't. Maybe I'll I have options.
Okay, cool. Well, anyway, thanks so much for setting that up. I know you've been working on that one for a while, so I really
and a big thanks to David Walensky, who's a friend of the podcast and has his own podcast. He was our connection point there. So thank you, David, for that.
Yeah, check out Game Thing. I just saw they've started on I think it's season 7.
I think they're doing photo modes. He said in games, or is that...
Oh really? Oh, interesting. Yeah. I'm going to look. Yeah. Oh, no. Season 7 is the one where they do wall hacks.
Okay. Well, you might need to edit that out then, because he told me about the next one, and he may not have announced it yet.
That's fine. I'll edit that out.
Okay. Sorry about that. We should probably edit it out.
Yeah, I'll take it out. All right. So we're not doing any email or reviews this time. We like the interviews to pretty much stand alone. But you can send those emails to devgameclub@gmail.com. I'll get any Apple ones for reviews to the podcast app that you might send in. But if you put them on some other service, let us know. Point us in the right direction. Love to read that stuff on the cast. You can find us on the web at devgameclub.com. Technically, I spoke on Twitter at DevGameClub. I Twitch sometimes at Brett Duville, and he Twitches at twitch.tv/
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
We mentioned the Discord there. There's a fan-run Discord who are still in the aftermath of our Defeating Games for Charity. I should say their Defeating Games for Charity streams. Really terrific. There is a link for that in the show notes. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, commissioned by friend of the cast Aaron Edwards, and our logo, of course, is by Mark Garcia, as well as that Discord, our merch store, all kinds of stuff. Have fun diving into either lakes or oceans this week, and good night.
Good night.